Welcome to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield.
Hello and welcome back to this episode of Byfield's Counsel Culture. Today I'm joined by Law.com reporter Habiba Cullen-Jafar, which is an absolute pleasure. We've been dying to have you on the podcast. How are you doing, Habiba?
I'm not too bad. I can't complain. It's a bit grey for summer's day, but it's no, busy.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I feel like everyone else is on holiday, but we're also working really hard. Yeah. I don't know how you are on your end as a journalist.
I had a really brief holiday. It was a long weekend away, and I just came back feeling kind of as tired as before I left. So yeah, it just keeps everyone day.
A holiday from the holiday is needed. Exactly. So today, I mean, we're going to just kind of dive into a bit of what you do, what you cover, and also kind of focus on the presence of US firms in London, which is something that, you cover a lot and Law.com covers, and the legal press really is covering a lot at the moment. So it's a great topic to cover, especially from your perspective, from almost not the inside, but adjacent to. Okay, so I mean, let's start off with sort of your beat, which is quite wide. It deals with really complex topics like M&A, litigation trends, and law firm strategy. So how do you approach covering such a wide beat?
I think it's something that is kind of encouraged by the editors, by the way that we work. It's sort of, you're encouraged to kind of foster an interest in a variety of topics, and if something does pique your interest, then you are literally you suggest you might pitch it, and if they're go ahead, go and look into that, then you go ahead and you do that. So that's probably why I've developed such broad as you say, such a wide beat, just because my mind works better looking at bigger pictures as opposed to smaller details and more niche topics. I prefer seeing stuff from a wider lens. So there are kind of I'd say, what's the word, overlaps between M&A trends, for example, and law firm strategies, and you have management interviews, and then there's also the kind of more human interest elements, so how are law firms approaching mental health strategies and DER and all of that. So it all kind of comes into one area, which is different, but also you can equate into understanding it as the industry as a whole. So that's sort of how that's happened. But I think a lot of it is the editors have encouraged you to develop a variety of interests and not just put yourself in a box and do one thing only.
That's interesting. It's good to know that you have some sort of autonomy over what you write about, because I'm sure that's not the same for every journalist. As a former journalist myself, I know that sometimes you're given a beat whether you like it or not, right?
Yeah. I mean, there is definitely we have receipts, let's say. We do also have firms that we are kind of assigned and that we should develop relationships with. I think you need to sort of have some kind of direction as to what you're doing. But I think broader trends and topics, it's whatever piques your interest the most. And I think it is pretty effective because you're best placed to write something and investigate something if you're actually into it, right?
100%.
Because otherwise it's a bit dry and fruitless.
100%. I completely agree with that. So obviously over the years, you've broken some really impactful stories. What in your view makes a great legal news story?
Yeah, that's it's quite a good question. Something gossip is, I'm not joking, but I think things that people don't, I mean, law firms historically have always been these quite opaque, quite conservative, mysterious institutions, and people don't always know what goes on. The partners sign partnership agreements, and it's all very behind closed doors. And I think how the legal press evolved was that it could offer an insight into what what is happening. It's a little look under the bonnet. I think beyond that, there are also like a kind of going back to that thing I was talking about, like this wider picture, and for example, when we write a moves story, it's not just partner A moves from firm B to firm C, and that's the story. It's more about like, what does this mean? What is it implying? What is the trend behind that move? Why is this firm investing in this practice area? So there's always a kind of broader narrative, which I think is what makes a good legal story. That's what the readers want to know, like what direction is the industry heading. So yeah, and of course, like going back to that kind of idea with gossip or whatever, like exclusivity, like people want to something that they want to read, but they don't know. They want to find out what's going on in the other firm, or how are lawyers at other firms treated, or what perks might they get. And I think those stories always do well too. But yes, I think that kind of covers what makes a good story.
The juicy stories. Yeah, exactly. No, I completely agree. And just on your point, in terms of the legal press and even our industry's PRs, it's all relatively new. As you say, historically law firms are opaque and mysterious. So it's great to now have an industry and a sector where we can explore that from both a lawyer's perspective, but also people that just want to know,
I mean, and even like from when I started, like 3.5, I would say 3 years ago, doing this, like the approach that law firms have to PR and to us as journalists, like has really changed. Like initially it was kind of, there was still a bit of a skepticism, and like a kind of, the PR was more of a blocker than someone you would collaborate with or cooperate with.
Exactly.
But there's definitely been a shift in terms of seeing as, there can be value in working together and providing, like it doesn't have to be bad. We're not, okay, I know I said gossip, but it's all, it's not all like, trying to point fingers and say, oh, you've done a terrible thing or this or that. It's much more to it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it would be no good for your relationships either if it was all about gossip, right? That's part of it. You've got to maintain those relationships.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, and as we well know, this year US law firms expanding in London has been all over the press. It's been covered in the legal press and the national press. So can you sort of provide an overview maybe of how this has happened over recent years?
Yeah, so I think, we can definitely go beyond just this year, even beyond way before my time, probably going back to my editor's time when he started as a reporter, like, US firms were coming in. I mean, a lot of it, I would initially, some firms, I'm thinking kind of like Sullivan and Cromwell even, or Sidley Austin, they've had satellite offices in London for 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. Like, they've been here, but it's probably only in the last 25 years or 20 years since that they've decided to diversify what they can offer to the London legal market. I think Latham had a year or two ago had their first trainee to partner kind of cohort, for example. So like, there's been a real development into what was initially just offices that would serve as US clients for aspects of UK law, into actually being firms that can take a deal that's happening in the UK and just service it and do the regulatory bit, do the tax bit, even if they are a US firm per se. So I think, the reason would that be what you'd be looking for, like, as to why that's happened? Or
yeah, I mean, I think that's a great reason probably the next question I was kind of going to ask you here is sort of the driving factors, which is that sort of servicing the clients the multi-jurisdictions and the connectivity of it all, and to be able to reach out as well. When I used to speak to partners, it was, I can now reach out to a partner in Paris or a partner in wherever, Dusseldorf or wherever it is, and we can collaborate on that deal
and have that free. I mean, I think the two words. I mean, private equity is just the, it is actually the reason why the US firms have been able to, not just why they're here, but also why they've been able to become so successful, because the clients, the PE clients in the US realize that UK being a gateway to Europe as well is just like super lucrative, right? So why not tap into that part of the market? And not to mention that back in the day, a lot of the UK firms were slightly reluctant to embrace PE. They didn't, I don't want to say that they thought it was vulgar, but like,
oh yeah, I mean, it's there's two sides to the coin in terms of his reputation, for sure.
Exactly. They were happy with their FTSE 100 and their kind of long-term established institutionalized clients. They were very comfortable with that. But I think PE's just come and like almost snowballed in terms of how lucrative it is, and the impact it's had on our high streets, on our financial services offerings, and that's just been a massive drive. That's been the driving factor, I think, for US firms being able to like get their foot in the door and be so successful, because it's it's given them the money to invest in London, and it's just been a kind of gift that's can provide.
Exactly, and the clients see that, and the clients see that it's a draw, isn't it? And in terms of sort of, so they've come in, they've got great clients, or they're bringing in a lot of money, as PE does. What impact has this had on the local sort of landscape?
Yeah, I think it's a maybe tricky question, because I don't want to be like overly negative, and then and I don't think it's US law. It's as simple as US law firms great, UK law firms.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think it's more like nuanced. I think if you look at, for example, Kirkland, and their sort of, when they started to really get their like building out in London substantially, was under their last I think he was called John Bayliss, but he saw the potential and did a sort of, you take what Paul Weiss did last year, but did it years back, and he hired a lot of fresh fields, like real premium talent, and tapped into, and other Magic Circle firms as well, and tapped into bringing these partners in, and as well as hoping that the clients would follow these partners as well. So obviously the impact on that is going to undermine the UK law firms. Saying that, Freshfields never got undermined either, right?
Right, exactly.
As strong as they were, they come back maybe even stronger, and they've also realized the US as an option for them too, to kind of break into. So that's what I mean. It's not as straightforward as just being like, okay, one side is good, one side is bad. I mean, this is jumping to another point, and where the editing might be needed, like from a more depressing angle, there's, I think, an undervaluing of UK assets. That is why private equity and US private equity is so interested in the UK. So like the stock market, for example, and not just that, but just the fact that they have deeper pockets and they can buy out these UK assets that are already undervalued. And that's not going to have a good impact on the economy, generally speaking, either. And it also means that these firms these deals will tend to be handled by US firms, and that kind of market share gets shifted over to one side. But yeah, so it's not super positive, but not necessarily like a kind of,
no, it's not. It's not a complete US firms, as you say, are doing great, and UK firms aren't. That's totally not the case at all. But it is an interesting sort of trajectory in terms of the market, and the noise is necessary sometimes, but also, as we've just pointed out, maybe sometimes it's a little bit overstated. In terms of sort of other practice areas, because we've just touched on PE, are you noticing any other practice areas or client sort of focus that US firms are really sort of going for compared to more of a traditional UK firm, or is it all in the same?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think when it comes to disputes, like there are some US firms that are, very disputes driven. So for example, Quinn Emanuel um has made their success by tapping into an area of disputes that other law firms really didn't want to approach, and they replicated what they did in the US in the UK. So it's not just transactional that's like being taken over by US law firms. In terms of other practice areas, and I'd say most of the firms that I go and speak to are keen to offer or keen to provide, or at least say they want to provide full service offerings, like full stop. I think as private equity deals get more complex, you need a tax guy, you need someone who can do compensations, you need pensions, you need like the full service offering. You can't just have some kind of big deal making partner who sure has the client, his best mates still plays golf with the client. Like you need the full team of people behind that to succeed and to execute the deal. So all of that, comes with like means that they are trying to hire people from UK firms in all different practice areas. Saying that that's not super straightforward either. I think, UK firms from a young, as trainee, when they have trainees, they it's much more established, right? It's kind of starting at root level, like from the ground upwards, as opposed to, just picking and cherry picking. Like you'd have a trainee who's well versed in English tax law and so I think, what was the original question?
Just kind of where the practice areas and the client focus is, which is kind of it's not as straightforward.
It's not just a matter of kind of cherry picking. And I think, and again, for example, like regulatory is a massive area where like all firms are needing to be on top of. Again, not just private equity orientated, but like just because tech law is
Exactly.
more stringent, and the government's trying to keep ahead of AI and this and that, and you need regulatory lawyers to kind of like be checking and be and so the US firms need to be on top of these areas where previously it might have been like a primarily transactional transactions driven office. Now they need to have the antitrust person.
Yes, exactly.
The tax guide, and because otherwise these deals just don't
go through. Exactly.
So it's not. I definitely wouldn't say it's like across all practices.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And even from my side, in terms of writing a press release, you've got a string of lawyers and completely different practices that come together to make the deal. It's definitely, as you say, it's not straightforward. So in terms of profitability and revenue per lawyer, how do US firms in London compare to their UK counterparts?
I'm excited. I think it's because no surprise that the US firms are more profitable. Full stop. I think we, when we do our rankings and when we do, compare the figures, and just looking at these moves and like why someone would move. US firms are just much more profitable. There's like a number of reasons. I think the US market is much bigger, so there's more work to go around, full stop. So they just have a bigger pot to begin with. They also operate at higher margins, and they are much leaner models. So like we often check in the office, there are some UK law firms that they've got PR teams of like 10 people, and you're like, oh, what are these, what's everyone doing? Whereas some US law firms of like 500 lawyers literally have one internal and external comms person, so there's that kind of element to it, which is the US model, which works. And there's also they like eat what you kill, right? So they there's a kind of drive to if you want to bring in, if you want to be profitable as a partner, well, it's the impetus is on you, or the onus is on you, as opposed to the UK law firms, which I mean it's different now, but the lockstep model, which was more relaxed and meant that like you didn't kind of have to worry too much about like how much money or how much profit you were as an individual partner bringing in, because you kind of covered. So it's like it's a kind of a number of things, and I think, and then there's also the billing rates as well come into play. US law firms bill higher, and that's, again, there's a number of reasons. I can't tell you every reason why, but often, I think somebody described it to me once. They were like, if you want something done well, go to a magic circle firm. If you want something done well but really, really quick, you'll go to Curly. It's compression. So like, and again, these are generalizations. People will tell you that associates at UK firms work as hard as US firms, but I think the work grind and the speed and the turnaround mean, and they do bill higher, and you're looking at smaller tiers of associates as well, which increases profitability. So all of that, I think, is where you're looking at, this combination of factors that's making profitability better.
No, that's a really interesting overview. And I suppose, it could be seen as, maybe aggressive isn't the right word, but it is quite an aggressive approach, right? There is kind of that stereotype of an American firm, which is a lot more sort of, intense.
Exactly, intense. And we kind of, and it's interesting, we sometimes, speaking to associates from both backgrounds, there's a real feel like when you're kind of at a magic circle, I'll use the quotation marks, because we are not sort of supposed to be called, kind of, we've sort of, I think, moved on from that terminology, and it's more like, but the UK headquartered firms that say have a much more different approach to their associates. They're much more kind of, I think I had one associate describe it to me as being spoon-fed what you were supposed to do. And so you assigned as kind of a client or a partner with a client and told to do this work and do that work. Whereas at a US firm, the team was much, much smaller, and you were also encouraged almost from day one to be like sniffing around for business, for looking for work, for being almost sharp-elbowed with your other associates. So it was like that ambition was instilled from day one, and that kind of ruthlessness in a way, which appeals to some people and doesn't to others.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I guess, could you say that you've seen a sort of UK firms taking more of a similar approach in recent years to sort of match that? Or do you think that, they're kind of keeping the way that they function the same? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's a bit of both. I think 100% UK firms have been forced to adapt how they compensate both their partners as well as their like more junior lawyers and associates. I think we've seen firms, off the top of my head, I know Clifford Chance to have shifted their bonus system last year to sort of better remunerate associates who, I think, in their own words, were, stand out as higher performing, who were like happier to put in more hours. I think there are other firms as well, that have had to look at the way that they do bonuses, because at the end of the day, even though everybody likes working and whatever, the paycheck that you get at the end of the month is a massive factor, and you can't have people working really, really hard but being able to earn twice as much. So they've had to adapt and sort of echo what the salaries are at other firms, or at US style firm, US style kind of remuneration systems. Saying that, they've also been pretty reluctant to completely give up their locksteps, right? I mean, lockstep engenders a sense of collegiality, and this is what, these kind of, say, conservative with a small c, old school UK firms are built on this sense of collegiality. There are still many partners at these firms who have been there since, as trainees, and that's really important. And by getting rid of that, then you lose that cohesiveness as a partnership. So they are reluctant to get rid of it. I mean, we're only seeing now firms like Freshfields even, kind of mulling kind of introducing non-equity tiers, because again, like it was very much, you know, once you're in the partnership, that's it. Like it's not an easy, flexible thing. But so they've been, I think, slow, not even slow, but just cautious to like take or to fully replicate what US firms do, because they don't want to lose the
culture of
the culture. Yeah, that is a partnership, right? So I think there has been changes, definitely. I think all of the firms, again, you look at lockstep models, they've all diversified, they've all, you know, added tiers and made it more kind of flexible to go from one tier to another, and to make sure that you have top of equity and you can remunerate your rainmakers and the people bringing in the big deals and whatever appropriately. But at the same time, they're not going to get rid of those models completely and embrace and eat what you kill and have your partners sort of fighting over work. Like it doesn't work with the business model of having the institutionalized client book.
Exactly. No, I think that's a really good way of putting it. And the thing is as well, which is, you know, something that I think we've all thought about, how sustainable is it for, you know, UK firms to carbon copy what a US firm does? From what you've kind of said, it's a completely different playbook that they have compared to UK firms. So it's apples and oranges almost, and it would be quite difficult to completely, you know, match what they were doing.
Exactly.
Although we are kind of seeing it, you know, we're seeing the sort of joust between the two. And who's maybe got the better culture or the better sort of approach. In terms of lateral hiring, which is, dare I say, your bread and butter almost, you know, that's a big part of your sort of your daily life. Are you seeing any sort of notable trends in lateral hiring or movement between the two at the moment?
It's difficult to say. I think since I've started, it seems like we always, hiring in London continues at a frenetic pace, is a line I've written like a million times. Because when I was saying that before, like traditionally, let's say like 50 years ago, partner would join and do his article cast, whatever they call it, and then stay there and make partner, and then retire at like 50, and put his feet up in the kind of private members club or whatever. Like obviously that way of working has changed, and it's changed across all industries. People don't just start at one place and stay, like they move on, and I think that's what's happened in the legal industry. I think the lateral moves bit comes from the that private equity bit to an extent, because the relationships that you have a partner with a lucrative relationship with someone at a private, the client, a private equity client, that person is super valuable. So if you bring on that partner and you bring on that relationship, then you've added who knows how many kind of millions to the revenue. So like that's what's triggered this kind of, we need when it's the top end of the lateral hiring market, but that kind of triggers it. People want these rainmakers, and they want it on their team, so to speak. I think, will the team, the original question was, let me remind myself if I start rambling on, notable trends, and I think, forget again of the last 5-10 years, people going from said magic circle, these elite UK firms, to the kind of elite US firms. That's been a definite trend, because the elite US firms, can offer in terms of the salary and even in terms of the platform, they've got the US PE client base. So that's also quite an attractive option. Saying that, we've also seen recently, like in the last year, a few people move back to from a US firm to a UK firm.
Okay, that's interesting.
Which is, an interesting concept. If and I think, Bruce Embley was at Freshfields, and then he went to Skadden, and now he's gone to Clifford Chance. And Jessica Gallagher was at Linklaters, and then she was at Paul Hastings, and she's gone to Freshfields. These might be wrong, so you might need to kind of correct, but I'm pretty sure that's what's happened. And so you've seen these trends, and when I go to UK people at UK or partners at UK firms are always very staunchly pro, obviously, the UK culture, firm culture, etc. And they say that on an associate level, they see loads of boomerang kind of people who want to try it out, and want to try out the entrepreneurialness or try out the kind of enjoy the salary, let's say, but then come back because there's a more cohesive way of working in a UK firm. So it's difficult to say what are the trends. I think that and apart and away from the kind of jumps between the UK US firms, there are also lots of jumps between US and US firms, and I think that's slightly more technical in terms of what platform can when you join as a partner and you've got a certain book of business, can you translate that book of business at a new platform at a firm that maybe isn't super established in London, and there's a few firms I think that are trying to get their foot in the door in the London market, but they don't necessarily yet have a big enough name or to get the big deals. So you also see these trends that when you have partners who will be at firm for a few years, try and make it work, but it doesn't work, and then they have to move. And these kind of bounce between different US firms to US firms because they have that there's that book of business that will appeal to US firms, but it doesn't quite translate once they get to the platform. So I think that's another trend that we see quite a bit.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's good. It's good to know. That's what I mean about sort of seeing it from the inside. that knowledge. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think people join on guarantees, and there's an expectation that after a certain number of years that will have developed into or produce some certain number of deals or a certain an amount of work, and when it doesn't, then someone might have to move on, or it could be that they're not happy with where they've found themselves. Exactly. So there's, I think, quite a few trends. It's pretty difficult to narrow and pin down a few.
Yeah, and I mean it is it's individual, right? These people are living their lives and just changing jobs as we would, and it's what I see. Exactly.
I think when I was making the beginning, people don't just leave university and then work in the civil service for 50 years and retire. You try new things.
Exactly.
Actually, I did want to add one other trend. I mean, and again, this isn't necessarily a new trend, but I think we've seen a few quite significant team moves. The one that really comes to mind is Jay Sadananda and Sam Hamilton moving from Latham to Sidley, the Lev Fin group. And that in itself is another kind of show. It kind of goes back to that thing I was saying. You see some partners bounce from firm to firm because they've been unable to translate their book of business in a certain platform. When you bring the team, or you're kind of securing yourself from that risk that you've got your tax guy, you've got your junior, you've got your associate that you can trust and will do the work. And there's been a couple, I think, Cahill. Who was it? It was King Spalding hired Sam. What's her name? The fund formation team. And again, there was a 4-partner team, I think. And when you bring that team on, you kind of secure the client. The client, you lessen disruption on the client because
exactly.
It's okay, cool. Well, it's the same people I used to work with. They're sure they're at a different firm, but I can trust it.
Exactly.
It'll be fairly seamless. So I think. So team moves as well, I think, is a trend that isn't necessarily new. Team moves have always happened, but it's something we'll see continue as firms look to kind of ensure that they consolidate the client that they're chasing, let's say.
And do you think that comes from sort of that competitive nature between sort of maybe the US and London, sort of hiring a team if possible. And do you expect that to sort of intensify? Do you expect this competition to intensify as the years go on, or do you think it'll sort of maybe mellow out?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think intensify. It's what I often ask like managing partners, are firms, when you're hiring, is it a more ruthless environment than it was, say, like 5, 10 years ago? And actually, they often say, like, to be honest, like, not particularly, maybe a little bit, maybe whatever. Like, I've had some horror stories of firms refusing to let partners go. I've had horror stories of firms letting one partner go, but then, especially in team moves, refusing to let the rest of the team go. And you get confusions with embargoes and all these kind of things. And that kind of, so that sort of like competitiveness, I don't think will go. I think firms are desperate's a bit of a strong word. I don't think they're that desperate, but I think they're keen to maintain, if they've got a good hold on a client, if they've got their foot in the door of a certain sector or whatever, then they're not going to let go of that easily. And you've also got to take into account that firms will have succession plans involved, and this is when the team moves become particularly disruptive. Because if it's one thing letting go of your high paid deal maker, sure, that's going to hurt, but in theory you've got somebody lined up who will take that spot and is actually less, paid less, so it's cheaper for the firm. But when you take that guy too, well, you're leaving a real gap, and that gap is harder to replace, because then you're like, it's that kind of competitive bit. I don't think is definitely gonna keep like continuing. I think that's why. So, yeah. That's the question.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting.
Then I guess on that note as well, like, just in terms of London being a hub for the firms, I don't think like that's gonna disappear either. I think it's still a massive, it's more than ever, if anything, it's like the gateway to Asia, to the Middle East, which is just like increasing,
that's ramping up.
Ramping up. It's becoming more and more relevant for firms in terms of a variety of reasons, both disputes and as well as kind of infrastructure work and energy, oil, etc. And then don't forget Africa, which has infrastructure. They have fiber optic deals. So it's still going to remain that kind of important hub for that gateway for the US to gain access to the rest of the world.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think firms are keen to keep like tapping into it, and we've seen firms like, as I said, Sidley, like make a huge number of hires this year. And they hired Ed Gander and his finance team for a while, and they and apparently they want to make more hires, I think. And then I was writing I can't remember now, but but a hire, and it was like I realized this firm as well had hired about 8 people in it was Proskauer had hired 7 finance partners in 1 year. Like, this is like these US firms are still like prioritizing London as a massive option for for profitability. It's super lucrative. I think I don't get this bit because I'm not a lawyer, but the partners always bang on about how well respected UK law is as well, and I think that's also true. And I think it's it's internationally speaking, can be applied in many different jurisdictions.
Yes,
and that's in itself a massive value.
I think when it comes to sort of arbitration and things like that, London is a seat that's preferred because of the law and things like that. So it makes a lot of sense, and it's encouraging to know that London is
it's like
despite what the market's saying.
At the beginning I was like, assets, stock exchange, stock market going, like bust or whatever, but like it's not so straightforward, and there's still like and some partners always manage to spend in a way where they're like, well, actually it's great for London, and it's there's still loads of interest, it's still like economically a really viable financial hub. So even if it looks from the outset that like oh, all these companies are being bought by foreign investors and whatever, like it looks depressing. It's actually a good sign of the fact that it's an active, vibrant market.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, in terms of, this image of US firms coming into London, which isn't true. I think we could say that, there's the competition there and they have come in, but it's not the sort of negative or, it's kind of associated with. And I think that's maybe, it's definitely a way to look at it, but I think there's a positive way to look at it too, in terms of, London is still a hub and it's still attractive. Well, thank you so much, Habiba. It's been an amazing conversation and thank you for joining me today.
No, that's it's been a real pleasure. As I said, I've rambled on, but it's not as depressing, I think, personally, as your sperms are going to overtake everyone, but it's a more kind of nuanced balance between what, some work will go to some firms and other areas of work will go to others, but it'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
Absolutely, and we could count on you to tell us. Okay, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone for listening. Bye.
You've been listening to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.